Hello, this is Alex Daniels. Thanks for joining us today on the Google Plus Hangout. I'm with the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and I'll be your moderator today. And we've got several excellent guests to talk a little bit about the Giving USA annual study on philanthropic activity. And this is a study charting 2013, which showed some growth. And we'll talk a little bit more about just what happened last year and what different charities are finding this year so far. So before we do that, I've got a few housekeeping tips, things to take care of. We'd love for you to ask questions, and you can ask questions here on the Hangout if you like. If you're watching on YouTube or Google Plus, and if you're watching on philanthropy.com, just comment in the chat box that's on the page, not in the comment section of the page, but the box that says Chronicle Live Discussion, and that's on top. And please send us a Twitter message. Use the hashtag PhilChat. That's PHIL chat. And you can review a recording of this Hangout when it's done. We should be archived immediately. So we should have some interesting things to go through. Philanthropic activity was up last year. Giving was up. Largely, it seemed fueled by more wealthy donors, larger gifts. But let's get into that in a sec. I'll introduce our guest today. We've got Rick Dunham, who's president and CEO of Dunham Company, which is a fundraising consulting company. And Rick serves on the board of Giving USA Foundation, which is the publisher of the report, which is also presented in conjunction with the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And so that report came out today. They've been doing it for a number of years and really serves as a real standard benchmark for the level of philanthropic activity in the United States. So welcome, Rick.
Thank you.
And next we've got Jill Horn, Senior Director of Community Giving at Metro United Way in Louisville. Jill, can you hear us?
Yes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome. And Rand Suffolk, who's Director and President at the Philbrook Museum of Art in Tulsa. Rand, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So maybe we could start by just giving an overview of philanthropy in 2013. The Giving USA report showed a 3% increase over 2012, really almost getting out of the huge hole from the recession, approaching 2007 highs of about $350 billion. Giving this last year was about $335 billion. And what I found really interesting was in previous years, Giving USA, the report suggested it could be a whole decade before we reach pre-recession levels, and that might not be the case. So I thought, Rick, maybe you can kind of outline some of the, some of the broader points that the study revealed, and tell us what happened last year with giving in the U.S.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you for having me. Great to be here. Giving USA for 2013 showed that, as you mentioned, giving adjusted for inflation was up about 3%, 4.4% in current dollars, and it's been this steady, slow climb over the last 4 years out of the ditch that philanthropy was in, along with the rest of the economy. And what's encouraging, a couple of things. One is we've always said one of the leading indicators for charitable giving is the stock market, and of course that's been driving a lot of the philanthropy. As the stock market has increased and there's been more wealth that's been shared, and 71% of the giving was by individuals, 87% when you count bequests and foundation giving, personal family foundation giving, it totaled 87%. All the sectors pretty much were up except for international affairs was down. Giving to religion was also a bit flat, and the one other sector I think that we were concerned about was human services. So basically, again, most of the sectors are up, and we're encouraged by that. There's been a lot of discussion around the giving to religion because it's obviously been the biggest sector that's received philanthropy in the past. It continues to be that way at 31% of overall giving, but as we've seen in some other reports, that there's a lot of still religiously motivated giving. In fact, 75% of giving in America is around that. Mm-hmm. So overall, I think as we looked at the reports and on the editorial board and and reviewed what was going on in philanthropy, there just seems to be this solid continued growth, although the rate of growth is declining just a little bit. So that's kind of a little bit of a shadow over the good news.
Yeah, Rick, the S&P was up, almost a third in 2013. Huge growth in the markets, and this obviously affected some areas of giving more than others, perhaps. But were you surprised that the overall level of giving didn't increase more rapidly given the market growth? And what were some of the factors that might have kind of brought that rate of increase down a little bit?
Well, I actually was a little bit surprised when you look at about a 29% growth in the stock market in the S&P 500 in 2013. It was a little surprising to me that there wasn't more related to philanthropy. And frankly, in some of the research, it's showing that there is gifts of 80 million or more. Many of those were actually fueling a lot of this, some of this growth, but a significant portion of the higher end growth. So I would agree that there's a little bit of a puzzle as to why giving didn't increase a little bit more. But I also do think that the drag on the economy, the continued kind of drag on the economy, some of the research we've done has shown that while people want to maintain their giving levels, they're still concerned about their personal economic situation. And so that there's almost like this tussle going on between giving where you want to give and being concerned about your own personal economic situation.
All right. And you mentioned with 3% growth, this is really kind of steady. What does that speak to kind of the psychology of your average American donor? It's been suggested that people really hate an uncertain environment, that if the economy is good or bad, that that may provide someone with a rationale to give or not to give. But what about this underlying certainty versus lack of certainty? Do you think that a 3% growth rate is are we back to some sort of normal, adjusting for kind of a boost right before the recession and then a steep decline after the recession? Are we at kind of a normal state of giving right now that suggests some more certainty, or are things pretty up in the air at this point?
Well, I don't know. I think it's kind of in between, because the average rate of growth is about 3.3%, and we're at 3% right now. So it's a little bit lower than what you would expect. And I just think, again, we've done some studies asking Americans about their philanthropic intentions. And what we do find is this continued concern over the future of the economy, kind of where things are going. And so as a result, you find people, again, wanting to do more, but really holding back just a bit. So the growth rates aren't, they're not fantastic, and they're certainly not in the tank, but they're kind of in what I would consider a moderate growth level, not where they were in pre-recession times.
Right, and you mentioned some of the areas that might have fared better or poorly, including religion, which seemed to decline a little bit last year. Before we go back and go through kind of a sector by sector approach, I wanted to get Rand Suffolk and Jill Horn into the conversation.
Sure.
And you mentioned some of the larger gifts fueling some of this growth, and gifts to artistic art institutions increased. They were one of the leaders over the past year or so. And Rand Suffolk, director at the Philbrook Museum in Tulsa, I think you expressed to me when we talked earlier some concern that higher donors were losing a little steam. But what are you seeing overall in terms of giving to the arts, and then to your museum in particular? And can you describe a little bit about what sort of approach you've taken to really connect with donors over the past year or two?
Sure. I don't think that. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I'm not entirely sure that I can certainly speak for my entire sector, but I do think that by and large there's still some real challenge there. And I had actually an interesting question while Rick was speaking about the role that perhaps donor fatigue played in all of that. I know, especially at our upper levels, that people have been really hit hard by not just demands and needs from arts organizations and cultural organizations, but also the social service needs throughout the entire community in the region. And I didn't know if that is adding some of the sort of the weight to moving this forward a little bit more quickly. I think for us as an organization, one of the things that we started to do early on was try and do perhaps a greater balance between taking care of the people at the higher levels that have really taken care of us and really striving to get a dollar from every household. And that was an effort really via our programs to try and reach a much broader audience, to engage people from every segment of our constituency, and really at the end of the day, try and create a situation where anyone, regardless of their level of giving, could become some kind of a philanthropist, could take some level of financial responsibility for making a difference with our institution itself. And we've been very fortunate, I think. We've worked very hard, but at the end of the day, we've seen a pretty considerable increase, especially at our lower and intermediate level of giving.
Gotcha. And what sort of things did you do to get people at those levels really involved with the museum? And do you have any indication that these might be sustained and growing relationships that you're creating?
Well, I mean, that's certainly our hope. I mean, we're hoping that, for lack of a better phrase, we're getting people onto that continuum of giving, even at the lower levels, and to really hopefully create sort of a lifelong relationship with people and allow them to grow throughout the course of their lives and their children's lives. What we really tried to do, the very quick answer to you is to look at how we were spending our dollars when it came to education. If you go back to 2007, 2008, we were spending approximately 2% of our entire education budget on families. Now we spend over 40% annually on families. So we made some strategic decisions about how we were going to spend our money, and then we really challenged our education department, and they rallied with creating really a handful of new programs that I think have kind of defined the end user Philbrook experience. And that's given us a great opportunity to become differently relevant than perhaps we had been in the past to an entirely new group of individuals, and at the same time allow us to reconnect with some people that had gone away. And I think the end of the day, what's been positive about it is that our numbers, the affirming character of the community's response, has encouraged some of those upper level donors to re-engage at a higher level, but also some of our corporate entities also to get involved.
So if I'm walking through the Philbrook in 2002, how does it look different on an average Saturday than it might on an average Saturday here in 2014? Who's roaming the halls these days?
Well, I'll give you one example. You bring up we started a program back in 2008 called Second Saturdays, and we decided that every second Saturday of the month would be free. We wanted to remove any real or perceived barriers to access on that day. We challenged our education department, as I mentioned, to create really a critical mass of hands-on, family-oriented programming that would take place. In 2007, we had about 490 people on average every second Saturday of the month. Now we're averaging nearly 2,000 people every second Saturday of the month. And what I've come to tell people is that if you want to see your museum functioning on all cylinders, this is really the best day to do it. There are people from every socioeconomic background. Our demographics by ethnicity are fantastic. I would say that probably outside of the mall, you're not going to find another spot in our community that is more diverse than Philbrook is on that day. We've been very fortunate. In the last 4 years, we've seen over 40% minority participation at the museum overall, not just on those Saturdays, and that's up from 10% just back in 2007 and 2008.
Right, and you alluded to this earlier, but every year you have a spring event, and every 2 years that event is a very large wine gathering. What has been the response from larger donors that populate those real splashy events? How are you able to tell that story to wealthier individuals or corporations that might want to support the museum?
Well, in 2012, we really made a very important decision that we were going to sell the work of the organization in advance of those events, not just try and sign people up for a great party. We had really developed a track record of achievement, and we wanted to share that. And we also wanted to make sure that people realized that we were different, that we were striving to be different, we were striving to have immediate impact within the community, and we really tried to sell that story, and we've been very fortunate. Most people are surprised to learn that back in 2012 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that fundraising event that you mentioned raised $2.4 million. This past May, we did it again, and we generated $2.66 million. We'll net about $2 million out of that event. So it's both humbling and inspiring to see the way that members of our community have responded.
Right, and I wanted to ask this both of you, of you and Jill. There has been a decline in some donors. You had mentioned to me the roles of wealthier donors or members has declined over the years, and I just wanted to mention. Rick said. This is steady growth, but there are some, things that give question to this idea that everything is going gangbusters. What's your overall assessment, both of you? Maybe Jill, you can jump in and kind of give your overall assessment of what 2013 was like and how you're experiencing 2014, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the efforts that you're undertaking in Louisville.
Sure. To go back to, Rick was talking about the stock market. It's interesting, this year I really saw the stock market play a huge impact in retirees. So, so many of our donors are giving through the workplace and really had an experience of people who were longtime givers who had put off retiring during the recession. Now that the stock market is back, they're feeling more comfortable that they were starting to retire. And for us, they were longtime leadership donors. And really, we saw people starting to cut back on their giving, not because they feel any differently about our mission or the work, but just because they're leaving the workplace and their disposable income has changed. And so I saw the stock market play an impact through retirees, and also going back to the stock market being up but really giving not keeping pace. I also have experienced people who are still rebuilding their wealth. And so people who lost money in their 401k, or for us, their 403b. And so, even though the stock market's coming up, where they were in terms of their net wealth hasn't come back yet. And so really starting to rebuild that wealth to prepare for retirement. And so that was one place where we had a decline in giving due to the stock market being up, which I thought was interesting for us. Certainly last year, a couple of sectors that we saw decreases in, which are no surprise, federal employees, especially with the shutdown, and healthcare. So we have a huge healthcare group here, and so we had lots of people who were downsized or just changes in healthcare made an impact on their giving, as well as the Affordable Care Act. So those were specific sectors that we saw changes in.
Right. How dramatic was the decline among federal employees in your community? People talked about as the sequestration was going on and the shutdown occurred that this was going to cause great damage. Looking back now, what is your assessment of the actual impact of that?
For us, in 2012, they gave $1.2 million, and last year we had a $200,000 decrease from federal employees. So it had a significant impact locally.
Right. And do you do a lot of work in kind of basic needs and human services? That was something I found that was interesting in the Giving USA report, and maybe others can chime in also. Increases in arts, increases in education, but when philanthropy really came to the support of basic needs and human services organizations during the recession, there seemed to be a little pullback from that last year. And I'm wondering if that was the case there and whether you're still experiencing that.
Absolutely. One of the things I thought was interesting, Rand, when you were talking about high-end donors and changing the message from coming to a party to really connecting it to the work. Really during the recession, we talked a lot about please give, the need is great, please give to the need, and really we've completely shifted our message and our focus from short-term needs to really looking at long-term aspirations. And so looking at how we can change the community for better in a long term, and really through a focus on education, through getting kids ready for kindergarten, graduating from high school, family engagement, and then of course basic needs, but really leading with that long-term aspirational message, and we really find people connecting to that.
Right. And how do you get donors really kind of primed with that message? Can you talk a little bit about any sort of volunteer efforts you might have among your workforce, and how do you get people involved without simply sending out messages? How do you make this their effort?
I'm so glad you asked. So one great program that we have, and we've really seen companies who want to be more involved and want easy projects for their employees. We have a project at Metro United Way. It's called a Family Literacy Kit. And it's really exactly what it sounds like. You bring employees in. We have a huge UPS contingency here. We have lots of UPSers, and so we set up an assembly line, and they put the kits together, and the kits include books, they include markers, they include writing pads, and they include really instructions for them parents. And so the project starts with explaining the importance of literacy and family literacy and having parents engaged in reading to their kids, and we really start out with that message, and then they put together these kits, which is a really easy project, but they see everything that goes into it. And then ultimately those kits get distributed to families, and last year we assembled and distributed over 2,000 of those kits. And so it's an easy project that we can do on site, or we can go to a company, have employees do them during the workday, and it connects the work to really what the end result is going to be, and really connecting it to education in a way that just painting walls or planting flowers, which are all important projects, but it really connects people to what the work is.
Gotcha. Rand, that sounds that's very tangible. It sounds a little bit like the My Museum kits that you offer to school children that come into the museum. It's something they can grasp, they can take home with them, or they can use it as a tool to go through the museum. This sounds like you're attempting to make a real connection with potential donors. Well, you mentioned corporate ties to the UPS community, and Rand, I know that some of your efforts have attracted some support from the local power company, One Oak. Corporate support was down this last year after an extraordinary 2012, 2013 really showed some declines. I'm wondering, Rick, do you think that that's just did corporate donations decline just by virtue of the fact that 2012 is fairly strong, or is this kind of a changing culture within corporations? Are they finding fewer nonprofits that really align with what they want to do, or what do you think is happening here?
Well, I don't think one year makes a trend, which is good. Corporate profits were nearly 20% in 2012, and they're a little over 3% in 2013. So I think our opinion is there's a correlation there, obviously, between the pre-tax profit that's available for giving and the amount that was not available for giving in 2013. But I do think that the organizations that we see working effectively in the local community have, as both Jill and Rand have talked about, is getting those corporates involved in the local philanthropy and the ability to impact the community. That's where we've seen the greatest impact. And it's this number here is driven obviously by the larger corporations, but often it's even the smaller businesses in a local community that will reach out and really want to make an impact on that community. And I've seen some very good trends at the local level around that.
Gotcha. Thanks. I had to switch back to you there for a second. I don't know whether you were on camera the whole time. I wanted to ask you, Rick, was there anything, you gave us a great overview, did anything really stick out as a huge surprise? What was the most surprising thing that you saw in this year's results?
I think the international, there's two numbers that were a little bit dramatic, is probably the way I would say it. Well, actually three. We work with a lot of faith-based organizations, so the continued flat growth in giving to religion was a little bit surprising. We thought we would see a bit of an increase in that, but when you dig underneath the surface on that, it primarily relates to the giving to houses of worship, and there's a plethora of faith-based charities that are attracting strong revenue. The second thing was the volatility of foundation giving. Again, if you look at the trending over the last few decades, and anybody in philanthropy has seen this, where there's been this growth in the number of family foundations, where people of high net worth are putting their estates into foundations, or putting their portfolios into foundations, and they're using that as a mechanism to give. Well, the pretty dramatic drop in giving by foundations was a little bit surprising, and it just shows there's tremendous volatility. Over 2011 and 12, it was at 29% growth, and last year it was a negative 16%. So to me, I guess I was a bit surprised by how volatile that particular area is. And then third was international affairs, part of which can be explained by a little bit to the fact that the natural disasters always play a key role in that. But again, a bit of a softening, about an 8% decline in giving in international affairs adjusted for inflation last year. That took me a bit back because we did have, we work again with a number of international organizations, and their giving has actually been up. So that one caught me off guard a bit.
Right. So let's go through those a little bit. You mentioned giving to religion, giving to foundations, and international affairs. In religion, you mentioned that you kind of, the demographics, of churchgoers, that we've seen real declines in church participation and attendance. Maybe we could start by outlining what is meant by a donation to a religious group, because there are a lot of organizations that might seem religious in nature that might be categorized in another subcategory. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. And I'm curious why you expected that downward trend for giving to religious organizations to stabilize or even increase. Was there anything that really made you particularly optimistic about that
Sure.
sector?
Well, first of all, giving to religion is primarily houses of worship. And if you have organizations, for instance, that are in education, an educational institution that might be religiously affiliated, they're going to be counted in education. Or if they're an international affairs organization like a World Vision or Compassion, they're going to be counted in that international category, or Catholic Charities. Even though obviously they're a religious organization, they're going to be counted in that international affairs slot. So you really have to take giving to religion as primarily giving to houses of worship. One of the trends that's been pretty significant is the percentage of Americans who say that they are not affiliated with a religious institution, order, or whatever. Back in the 1960s, that sat at around 5%. Today, that's running somewhere between 15 and 18%. So over triple the number of households who say they're not religiously affiliated. So that obviously accounts for that. There's also been declining rates of participation and attendance, as well as declining membership. Primarily in what I would call mainline denominations. So I think that all those factors together play into the decrease in giving to religion. You've also had a dramatic increase in the number of religiously affiliated charities who are counted in one of these other categories. A great example, that they've been around forever, but they still represent a huge amount of giving, is the Salvation Army. They're technically organized as a church, but they do a ton of work, obviously, in the social sector. So they would be counted in that category. To answer your other question, when the recession hit, religion was the one area that struggled the most and has struggled the most in terms of recipients of philanthropy. And my expectation in working again in a pretty broad sector here of faith-based organizations and seeing what's being done in a number of churches, I expected to see that trough to be more short-lived, but it's really struggling. It's maintaining for this year, for adjusted for inflation, it was about a 1.6% decline. So the only thing I can think of is that what's happening is that giving to religion is shifting. And it's shifting more away from congregational or houses of worship type of giving to more charities that are organized around a religious cause or purpose or have some sort of a religious affiliation. Connected to Give, a study that was done a year ago, showed, and it was primarily focused on the Jewish community, but then it broadened the research out to religion generally, showed that 75% of giving in America is religiously motivated at some level. And that can be pure altruism or specific to a religious purpose. So I think the long answer is it's a bit of a complex situation. I just think it's a bit of a shifting sand more than anything.
Right. Well, thank you. And I wanted to before we get into foundations, I wanted to remind anyone who's watching that we'd love to have your questions. We've got Jill Horn from the Metro United Way in Louisville and Rand Suffolk from the Philbrook Museum in Tulsa, as well as Rick Dunham, who was just talking a little bit about religious giving. So please send in questions on the philanthropy.com website, or you can tweet them using hashtag PhilChat, PHIL chat. So we'd love to get your questions. And maybe I could follow up, Rick, and we were talking a little also about foundations, giving to foundations. Can you tell us a little bit about the role of donor-advised funds? I was curious whether giving to foundations had decreased partially because philanthropists were choosing those vehicles to make contributions through the funds rather than giving through foundations, or do you think that that has a real negligible effect?
Now, I have not seen a study on that. I know on an anecdotal level, we have seen a number of high net worth individuals place their money into donor advised funds. And I'm aware of a number of donor advised funds that over the last 10 years have grown dramatically into the billions. So I take your point. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit of a pullback. What tends to happen, though, is we've seen this, like when the Gates put tens of billions of dollars into a foundation, that affects obviously foundation giving to foundations. So a lot of that, my understanding is more the volatility is around the size of the gifts that are being put into foundations. Although it'd be interesting to study the effect of donor advised funds on foundation giving. That's a very interesting correlation.
Right. So, Jill and Rand, it sounds like what Rick was saying earlier was that this could be a recovery that's based on two tiers of giving, and giving at the really extreme upper level might be really providing some buoyancy to the entire philanthropic sector in the U.S. It sounds like you're really targeting a lot of your efforts at the smaller to mid-sized donors. Is that where you can see yourself focusing over the next year or so, or do you have any specific efforts to really bring in some larger donations, or is that really how can one do that given the current environment?
Rand, I'll let you take that first.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think for us, one of the when it comes to it's kind of an interesting dichotomy for us, because on the one hand, if you look at just membership, our highest level of membership, those donors that provide $2,000 and above, we really took a big hit during the recession, and we have not seen ourselves return to that. And so one of our goals, frankly, in that area is just it will remain to be, how do we get back what we already lost? And I think we've done a little bit of research internally, and what we're finding is both a little bit of donor fatigue that I mentioned earlier, but there's also a real generational shift happening. There's a lot of those donors at that level that are getting older. They're not, quote unquote, using their membership to the extent that they were in the past. There are other demands on those dollars, and they're electing to go away. And that's been the big problem for us, is that we're not seeing people at that level go from a $5,000 contribution a year down to a $500 membership, or from a $2,000 membership down to a $250 membership. What we're actually seeing is that they just go away entirely. And so that's been a challenge for us, and we've been, I think, doing a pretty good job at starting to rebuild that from the bottom up. We have a category of kind of younger donors that can get in before a certain age threshold at that level. That has grown considerably during the last number of years. But we're also really going to have to do a much better job at expanding the circle for us and finding new donors that will come in at that upper level. Now, so on the one hand, you look at those upper levels of members, and we're seeing those numbers, remain low in comparison to pre-recession levels. On the other hand, as I mentioned, people are stepping up in a big way when it comes to our special fundraising events. I mean, that they came and helped us hit a real home run there. So it's really going to be based on that one-on-one, I think, continue to build that relationship with those folks to get them back and to build that base of support in that key area. The other real continued surprise, I think, for us, one of the things that's been very encouraging has actually been our foundation support. We've seen our foundation support increase almost 80% from 2008 during that time period. And this fiscal year, FY14, it's gone up again. So we're really encouraged by that. Tulsa as a community is blessed. There are a large number of private family foundations, as Rick was talking about. There are plenty here, and they've really taken the lead, I think, in providing a great support for our programming. So that, I think, will continue to be an area that we'll have to move. We're going to need the same care and feeding with them that we would our other donors. I mean, I think we're going to have to look at them as being those kind of donors and build a relationship over time, not just when we have our hand out looking for another round of fundraising.
All right. And Jill, maybe you can jump back on that. I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of donor fatigue. And I'm curious how much of that has to do with just the economy and how confident or not confident people might be, and how much that may have to do with just the plethora of nonprofits that are out there competing for the same dollars. So maybe you can talk a little bit about whether you're experiencing a lot of competition. I don't know if that's the case, and Rand, maybe you can also speak to that a little bit about what the competition for scarce donor dollars is like in Tulsa.
Right. No, I think that's a great question. I think it's been a challenge, for all United Ways to be able to differentiate ourselves from other charities and other charities that people may have a specific connection to, health charities or their church or their university, to explain the work of United Way and how what they do when they give to United Way, how that really creates results and creates community level change. And so that's really been a shift in the message and in the work of United Ways nationally, to be able to explain what happens when you give and how that makes a difference. And so really to be able to motivate people to give, beyond, help that the message of giving to charity and the giving to needy and giving to basic needs, how we explain what the long-term impact of giving is through United Way has been something we've really done a lot of work on, being able to actually do the work and also explain the work. And so I think that we've seen donor fatigue for people who are interested in giving just to the general fund, that people are really, that's not very motivational. And so we've seen people who have cut back on those gifts, but really who have been motivated by giving to specific programs that we have in our early childhood work specifically. And that's really been where we've seen both corporations, family foundations, and major donors really invest more.
Right, and how much of how much of your support, United Ways are spread throughout the country. I would imagine that you get a lot of support from rank and file donors, whether it's at the workplace or otherwise. We talked a little bit about the large stock market gains fueling a lot of this growth. Can you kind of give us the profile of your average donor and what the kind of crawling back up out of the recession has been for that person? Has he or she, are they ready to donate at this point? Or what do you think their mindset is now compared to, say, a wealthier a donor or a family foundation, which also provides a basis of your support?
That's a great question. I think that what our experience is, and kind of the rank and file donor, we have over 65,000 donors here in the Louisville metro area, in terms of how people are feeling about what they want to give to, has really changed. And I don't think that people are where they were really in 2006 was our best year. And so I don't think that in terms of confidence in the economy has really fully recovered. And really what it's meant for us is we've had to change our message and how we connect to people. And that's, another great thing and a challenge about United Way is that really that once a year in the workplace, give to the community fund, that message and that relationship is no longer really motivates people to give. And so what we've had to do is to find, different ways. Rand, I love, that second Saturday idea, and how do you find new ways to connect to people. And so really what we've been doing is working with companies who really have employee engagement goals to really help them meet those goals. And so how do we identify where those intersections are so we can have relationships with donors and employees in new ways. And so that's been really the way that we've addressed how people are feeling about what their giving situation is, and also how they feel about giving to United Way.
Now, is there a way to connect with those companies that have employee goals and connect that with the overall corporate goal? Because as we mentioned before, corporate contributions, perhaps because pre-tax profits were not as robust as 2012, corporate contributions went down a bit. Are you seeing companies in your area become a little hesitant, a little more, are they giving more scrutiny to what exactly is you're doing to make sure that it really meshes with their kind of corporate vision? And are they a little more standoffish? And is there a way to connect employee plans, employee giving, with the plans of the entire company?
The short answer to that is yes. But one of the experiences that I had, and I'd be curious if Rand or other local organizations have had this experience, is that just fewer and fewer corporate giving decisions are made locally. When I started my career, 20 years ago, any bank in town we could go to the bank president. The bank president had full discretion on those local corporate dollars, even for national banks. And now I don't know that there's a single national bank in our community that you can go and make that direct ask anymore. And I'm just using banks as an example, but that really applies to so many of the companies that we work with that are national companies, that they just don't have that local giving decision-making ability anymore. And I think that for us has certainly impacted giving locally.
What do you think, Rand? Does that resonate with you a little bit? Do you have a similar experience in Tulsa?
A little bit, but not, I don't think to the same degree. I mean, our challenge, going back to that matchmaking idea that you brought up about how do we connect our values with the values, or the work that we're doing with the values of those businesses, has been something that we continue to work on. That major grant, when One Oak, as you mentioned, decided to step forward with great corporate leadership and support our Second Saturdays program with an initial grant of $200,000 to really take ownership of that for 2 years, and they just re-upped for another 2 years. We really had some, I think, very important conversations about them. I mean, they have been very clear that diversity and inclusivity is, a true blue value for that organization, and we were able to demonstrate with our track record that we felt the same way, and that this program was going to give us an opportunity to deepen that. And so that's what they got on board. And I think the real importance there, that's a major company, but we need to do a better job with, I think, some of the smaller businesses in our community. If you look at our corporate membership, for example, we went pre-recession, we were probably getting about $160,000 a year from those businesses. Last year, it was down to $85,000. I mean, we had a huge tumble. We have simply not been able to make that back. And that ends up really being sort of a double whammy for us, because on the one hand, we get those membership dollars, but what we realized was that pre-recession, most of those people were joining so that they could have events at our place. And you went through a period with the recession where first nobody had any money, and then none of those businesses wanted to be perceived as having any money for a while after that. They didn't want to have the big holiday party at the event or bring in their special clientele and so forth, because that just didn't feel right during that time period. And what we're seeing is, while some of that rental income has started to come back for sure, we're not necessarily seeing that business membership component follow. And so I think we've got some real work to do in terms of, again, dovetailing our programming, our impact, and our relevance with the values of even those small businesses moving forward.
And another example, as you were talking, I was thinking, to answer your question, one program that we have with PNC, if you're familiar with PNC, really Grow Up Great and really early childhood is their corporate focus. And so that aligns greatly with our early care and education strategic initiative. And so one program that they fund specifically that really would not exist without their corporate investment is a kindergarten countdown program. So a program during the summer that kindergartners get to go to all kinds of great cultural experiences and really get excited for kindergarten. So I think that that's an example of aligning corporate social responsibility goals and focus with, aligning with United Way with our strategic initiatives.
what do they do in the kindergarten countdown program? What are some of the activities?
Well, they go to a bats game, so that's one of our baseball team. They go to the museum, of course. They go to the zoo, but really, and my girls are in 4th and 5th grade now, but they get a backpack and they get a T-shirt that says, "I'm going to kindergarten." And so all these little kids show up to these great programs. And so my little girl Zoe would go up to other kids and ask, what school are you going to, and start to, meet some of their classmates, but get really excited about the program. And so it lasts all summer long, and there are lots of those kinds of great activities that really PNC underwrites and makes happen. And so it's an exciting, I know when I had kindergartners, it was fun to see them in their little T-shirts getting excited about going to school for the first time.
Well, you're bringing back lots of fond memories for me, for sure. Rick, maybe we could come back to you for a sec. I'm curious about the overall level of giving as a percentage of gross domestic product. I mean, this seems to be a real stubborn metric here. It just doesn't seem to have budged for years. What do you think can be done to increase giving? Is this just a measure of the effectiveness of nonprofits and charities to reach out to potential donors, or is there something larger in terms of the broader economic situation that's going to have to change for that level of giving to increase? We seem to be a little stuck here, don't we?
We do a little bit, although it's hung at around the 2% mark historically. Back in 2005, it bumped up to about 2.2% of GDP, which doesn't seem like a huge increase, but it actually was a pretty dramatic increase, and 2.1 in 2007. And obviously, the challenge has been that GDP has been struggling. So when you have a GDP that struggles and you have a percentage of that actually goes down, it was down in 1.9% range during the recession. I think the fact that it's back up to 2% and that we're seeing some economic growth now is actually a fairly good sign that people are beginning to re-engage. But just listening to the conversation and thinking about the number of organizations that we work with, I tend to agree. I think one of the themes kind of underlying in this conversation is that the recession created a new normal around fundraising. It shifted the landscape dramatically. And listening to what Jill and Rand have done, and I know other organizations have had to do to re-engage supporters, the shifting landscape in terms of those who lost greatly in the Great Recession and now are trying to recover their portfolios. It's just a real mixed bag. And I think it's going to be. There's nothing in the numbers that would indicate that the shift in, or the amount or the percentage of GDP is going to shift at all in terms of giving in the near future.
So I guess it's it would seem that it's incumbent on charities, institutions like the Philbrook Museum or the United Way in Louisville to really stand out in a crowd. Then I suppose. Can you tell us, Rand and Jill, a little bit about what sort of efforts you've made in terms of professionalizing your fundraising staff, or what kind of fundraising staff you have, and what's it going to take to really stand out if there's a lot of competition and giving as a percentage of GDP looks to possibly remain pretty stable? I guess you're really going to have to stand out somehow. And we've gone over a lot of this, I think, but do you have any thoughts on really just standing out in a crowd?
Jill, I'll let you answer this one first.
I had a feeling that was coming. That's fair enough. Professionalizing our fundraising staff, really during the recession, really what we went through is a deeper focus on relationship building, and really, knowing that the relationships that we have, that's really what drives giving and drives giving more is that we have relationships with our donors, corporate, foundations, and individuals, and they know the work that we do. And so really the recession drove this focus on relationship building through, we use the consultative sales model. I know there are different organizations who use different models. For us, one of the efforts that we've had is really how can we, when we do have turnover from staff, how can we make sure that there's a continuity of that relationship? And so how are we using analytics and documentation and our database to be able to record those conversations and the relationship, and to be able to do a better job of that? We've had it's interesting you would ask. We've just had a turnover in our staff and in staff leadership in our fundraising team, and so that's really what we've been doing, is making sure that those relationships are strong, but also that we do a good job of documenting and continuing the relationship regardless of who the staff person is.
All right.
I think, Jill, I would just kind of add emphasis to what she said about relationship building. I mean, I think that that's going to be wildly important. I mean, the old aphorism about people giving money to people as opposed to a big target called, the United Way or Philbrook, I mean, that just doesn't hold water anymore, and we certainly have to do a better job on that. But I also think it really is going to come down, you talked about how do you stand out, and I think increasingly it really has to do with, how your organization generates its own content. I mean, I think there's probably nothing more important right now in this day and age than, as an organization, generating your own intellectual capital. On the other side of that, ensuring sustained access to that capital, and then using that engagement at the end of the day to generate relevance, to really become essential within your community, and then to use that to kind of develop that other capital that you need in terms of the finances and so forth. But I think moving forward, at least for our organization, that's going to be one of the key components. I mean, there's always going to be competition out there. I can't imagine it's ever going to get easier, so to speak. And so both from a missionary standpoint, as well as what one of my colleagues, Philippe de Montebello, longtime director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, once talked about the missionary as well as the mercenary objectives of what you're doing. And from the missionary standpoint, we have to be compelling, but it's equally important, I think, from the mercenary standpoint as well.
All right.
And another, just talking about, continuing to be relevant, and how do we connect first with hearts, and then with the resources, with the mercenary part of our mission. One of the efforts that we have in thinking about how we use social media is we have a social media street team. And so we recruit all kinds of people, whether they're donors or potential donors, younger people, clearly, and just a variety of employees and people throughout the community to be a part of our social media street team. And so thinking about how we use social media beyond liking us on Facebook, there's an app, I don't know if you've heard of it, called Social Toaster. And so you can sign up and you get points for liking and sharing and tweeting, and then there are prizes for the different points that you get. So I just saw my points, I didn't rank as high this month, so I'm also part of the team. But it's really thinking about how we engage people through social media beyond just clicking that like button, and also giving people opportunities to develop relationships and get to know United Way before they give. And so certainly our social media street team is a huge effort for us to connect with new people in different ways and to stand out.
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to be part of the philanthropy.com street team. And remind our viewers that if you have questions, there are a couple ways you can ask them. You can go on, if you're on the philanthropy.com website, there's a box at the top of the page that says Chronicle Live Discussion. So don't put a question in the comments section below, but at the top of the page, you can ask a comment, you can make a comment or submit a question. Or you can tweet them at philanthropy with the hashtag PhilChat. That's PHIL chat. And hopefully we'll have some questions coming in, but maybe I can ask a question that perhaps I should have started with. I was wondering, Jill and Rand, if you can kind of give us your baseline gut feeling about how things are going. This report said some moderate growth. How do you think things went, and what do you think the future holds for the next year or so? How good are you feeling?
Well, I'm not depressed, but
I like that. I'll second that.
I think it's going to continue to be hard. I mean, I do think that the level of uncertainty that's out there is still pretty significant, and people just aren't sure where things are going to go. And I think that because a consequence of that, it's just going to become, it's just still going to be an uphill battle, I think, moving forward.
Right. Do you agree, Joel?
Yeah, I agree. I've seen giving, for me, what I've seen is giving to specific initiatives. So whether that's our Excellence Academy, which is a preschool quality program that's led by United Way, or out of school time programs, that people who are interested in that directed giving and seeing results, that's where I've seen giving go up. People who are interested in giving to the community fund, to the general fund, that's where I see the uphill battle continue. But I agree with Rand. I've seen improvements, and I'm not as depressed as I was in 2007, but it's still, there are still challenges out there, and figuring out how to connect with people and to motivate and inspire them to get engaged is still something we're trying to figure out.
Rand, Jill kind of outlined some of the social media efforts that she's been taking there in Louisville. What is Philbrook doing on Twitter or Facebook or any of the other platforms? To what extent are you exploring this, and is it an area of communication, or are you actually seeing it translate into contributions?
That's a great question. I think, one of the things that when the world turned upside down financially, one of the things that it did was challenge us to look at our existing staffing and to kind of figure out where we needed, not to be right-sized, so to speak, but where we really built the right way for our organization to move forward. And one of the key decisions we made was to hire a full-time online communities manager.
Mm-hmm.
When I hired that individual back in July of 2009, we had about 2,100 people following us on Facebook. Now we have over 37,000 people following us on Facebook. In a similar fashion with Twitter, we had about 1,000 people. Now I think that's over 8,000 people following us. So I think he and the rest of our communications team have done a remarkable job at turning that into really not a one-way street, but turning it much more into a dialogue. It's not just about here's what's happening next, come in and see it. Now, certainly that has made our communications efforts more nimble. Obviously, like everyone else, we can tell people about things that are happening in 3 minutes, 3 hours, or 3 days. But the other thing that it's been really important, I think, for us is that it's encouraged us to be a better listening organization. We can put questions out there about that end user experience, and as you can well imagine, we get pure, unfiltered, raw data back about what people loved, what they hated, what worked, what didn't work. And frankly, if we're doing our job appropriately, we can take that feedback, roll it into our ongoing assessment, and hopefully get better every single day. Now, the flip side, and have we been able to appropriately and ethically monetize that? And I think there's still work to be done for us. We do, for example, I think every Tuesday, today's Tuesday, right? People should go on our Facebook page, and we're probably highlighting a product from our museum store. And typically, we're fortunate and people come and buy it after that. A couple years back, we did a program called Don't Pay in May, where we decided that we would challenge our online community. We said, this is what our budgeted revenue from admissions is for the month of May. If we can raise that ahead of time, we'll stay open every single day in the month for free. We'll keep the whole month free. We were able to get 2 weeks out of it. But that was kind of our first, I think, somewhat bold step into trying, as I said before, to figure out how we could generate additional income from there. And we're still paying attention to see if we can steal shamelessly from somebody else that's figured out how to do this much better than we have. We feel that there's potential there, but we certainly don't have all the answers.
Right. And Rick, we do have a question that someone asked about how to engage corporate donors to get them revved up again. We kind of went over this a little bit before, but maybe we could kind of wrap up with a discussion of to what extent pre-tax corporate profits drive corporate involvement in philanthropy. And you mentioned at the outset that this is not all great news, and you've got some real questions about what's going to happen over the rate of growth seems to be slowing a bit. So what do you see for the next 12 months or so? How optimistic are you?
Well, I really agree with both Rand and Jill that while encouraged in the movement forward, it's still a real struggle. We work with over 50 organizations, and I don't know any of them that are just putting home runs on the board all the time. It's just hard work. Two words that come to my mind are, first of all, Rand used the word relevance. More than ever, I think donors want to know that you're relevant, and they've got to understand how you as an organization play a relevant role not only in their lives but in the community or in the cause that they care about. The second is that Jill used the word inspire. That's another thing. I think when donors see that relevancy, they want to be inspired to support your organization or the work that you do. And it's all about the way that you're transforming lives, transforming the community, the outworking of what you do as an organization. So circling back around then to corporates, we have a client that we work with in one community where they've had a great success in working with local businesses that are not big national chains, but they're locally owned businesses that want to impact the community, and they've given those businesses an effective on-ramp to help meet the needs of the poor in particular within that community. And it's been fantastic to watch the way that they've created these relationships and partnerships. And to me, that's the point, is they've figured out how to be relevant to the local business, how to inspire them, giving them an opportunity to use their organization as a platform to make impact. And it's been brilliant to watch.
Well, we'll leave it at that. We'll have to see how things go over the next year or so. I want to thank everyone for joining us who asked questions, and folks watching, thanks for checking in. To our guests, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your insight here. You've told some stories that really kind of bring some meaning to the just the figures that we've seen in the Giving USA report. So Rick Dunham, who's a president and CEO of the Dunham Company, and a board member of the Giving USA Foundation. Sir, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Jill Horn, Director of Community Giving at the Metro United Way in Louisville. Thank you again. Thanks for joining us. And Rand Suffolk, Director of the Philbrook Museum in Tulsa. Really appreciate your time and your insight, and we'll have to do this again.
Great.
Thank
you
very much.
Thank you. Signing off.